I really don't want to pull a complete sweater apart and reuse the yarn. I would rather find a purpose for that fabric that I made and see it live a happy life. Hi, my name's Mark and welcome to the channel. Today I'm dealing with a situation where I have a sweater, I spent a lot of time working on it, and I just don't enjoy it. It doesn't fit me the way I want. It's not the right material for the pattern. All in all, it's not perfect and it's not something that I wear. So for the first time, I plan to chop up a sweater completely and try to seam it back together so that it will better fit a friend of mine. So this is a sweater that I'm going to be gifting to my friend Rihanna. We sing together, we get to see each other maybe once a month, maybe once every other month. And as I was making this sweater, she said, if you ever decide you don't want this sweater, I would love to have it as a hand-me-down. So I took the sweater to her about a month ago and it's still too oversized. She said she's fine with it being slouchy, but it's just too much. So my plan is to seam up the sides of it, chop the sleeves off, and try to reattach everything so that it can be a better suited sweater to go to my friend. If you're interested in learning along with me, then stick around and let's get into it. So before we chop anything up, let's take a look at the sweater. This is Vesper with a Twist by Thea Coleman of Baby Cocktails, and I think it's a really beautiful pattern. We've got cables all across the front, sort of a turtleneck shawl collar situation, and then the sleeves are just stockinette. The back of the sweater is also stockinette. So I showed this sweater in my Year of Sweaters sort of sweater parade video, and I recommended it if you're someone who loves cables, but you're not looking for the involvement of a pattern that has cables all over the place. You still get a sweater that's beautifully cabled on the front, but you get to knit the back and you get to knit the sleeves. So I mentioned yarn choice. I made this out of a sweater quantity of Rowan felted tweed. I like Rowan felted tweed, but at this gauge, I felt like the cables didn't stand up enough, at least on my frame. So I think this sweater will suit Rihanna well because we're different people, we have different styles, we have different bodies. For me, I wanted something with a little bit more structure, and at this gauge, after blocking, you can see the sweater is kind of limp, and on me, that wasn't a good look, or at least a look I wasn't happy with. So I was able to have Rihanna try this on about a month ago, and I just took an eyeball measurement. And at the time, it looked like I could come in from the edge about halfway between the cables and the far edge. So I want the new seam to be somewhere about here. And I'll do that on both sides, so I'm losing probably like 8 inches, 6 to 8 inches of ease on each side, which is a lot, but this sweater fits me with quite a bit of ease, so I'm going to be taking out a lot of that side fabric. It's not going to interfere with the cable pattern. The only tricky part for me is going to be figuring out how to safely chop the sleeves off and reattach them. I'm sure plenty of people watching would know exactly what to do. I wish you were here with me to hold my hand and guide me through the process, but I've machine sewed my knits several times now for steeking purposes. This will be the first time I'm doing it to repiece a sweater. And if it goes well, I think it'll be a good skill to at least have a little bit of experience in, so we'll see. The last note about adjustments, I don't think anything needs to be done to the neck hole opening or the top. So fortunately, I can leave that part alone. I don't need to do anything extra to the sleeves. We like how much space there is in the sleeves, having them be a little bit oversized, but I just want to bring the sides in and reattach those sleeves. So let's get to it. So the plan is the neck will stay the same, but there's, I don't know, the sleeves might be okay, but there's definitely too much in the body. So I just wanted Ned to try this on because he's going to be a good stand-in model before this goes to Rihanna, and I want to make sure I'm not going to take too much off of it. So I'm thinking when I had Rihanna try it on and I just eyeballed it, we took about 3 inches in on each side, and then it's still going to be oversized and slouchy. I don't think I'll do anything to the length. I think I'll leave it long, but we're going to take 3 inches in from each side, and then I have to figure out how to secure the sleeve and then reattach that in. Okay, so I guess if I just bring it in,
Yeah.
it'll be okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
As today's video focuses on something that I'm truly not good at, something that I have very little experience doing and that I'm really just dabbling in, I'm very excited to announce that the video is sponsored by Skillshare. So I'm excited specifically to take advantage of some of the sewing courses and resources available to me through Skillshare. I've turned to YouTube for several years to learn a lot of the crafts that I do. When I need help with my sewing machine, when I was learning how to knit, I like to learn through videos. So when Skillshare reached out about partnering together for a video, I was excited to take advantage of that opportunity. So I headed over to Skillshare where I first perused some of the sewing classes available. I was looking for ways to get to know my machine better, just understanding a little bit more about garment construction, or in this case, reconstruction, to make sure that I would save myself a little bit of a headache in putting everything back together, hopefully the right way. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and more. Skillshare can help you take your career, skills, or hobbies to the next level. So as I was setting up my Skillshare account, I was impressed with how broad the topics are. So for me, I'm interested in using things like post-production, video editing, things that could help me save time or make these videos a nicer viewing experience for you. And obviously, I'm interested in a lot of crafting things. So today we're starting with sewing, but there are great knitting, crochet resources there as well. The course that I specifically use to aid in today's video is one about sleeve insertion. So this is called The Easiest Sleeve Insertion Couture Technique, and it's by Marcy Newman from So Much More. We've just celebrated Thanksgiving here in the United States, and this month Skillshare is highlighting gratitude, specifically highlighting a personal creative habit that can be its own gratitude practice. So just like I say on the channel, we should all take the time to step back from what we're doing and just soak it in. So if you have a craft, if you have a hobby that you love and enjoy, take the time to really appreciate it and let it work its magic for you. The first 500 people to use my link in the description box will receive a 1-month free trial to Skillshare. So get started today. Again, thank you to Skillshare for partnering with me to make videos like this come to life. Now, let's see if I can survive the sweater reconstruction. Let's start with my setup. I've got this beautiful sort of sewing notions box that Ned got me for Christmas or birthday a couple years ago. And I don't sew often, but I bought a machine during the pandemic. I bought my sewing machine in 2020. I wasn't knitting that much back then, and I just wanted to pour my time into a new craft. I wanted to learn something new and spend time learning how to use a sewing machine. So I made a couple of quilts and got my feet wet. My first step is to turn the sweater inside out so I can mark where I'd like to seam and then have all of those seams on the wrong side of the fabric. You'll notice as I go through this process that I don't have a tape measure or a ruler in sight. I'm really eyeballing things for the most part, and I am counting my columns of stitches and my rows to make sure that things are even from one side to the next. But if you've been here on the channel, you know this is typically how I work. I do check my gauge swatch. I do test my fabric or my fiber before I jump into knitting a whole project. But I like to get things rolling and get them done, and some of that includes trial and error. And that's how this process is going today with the sewing. The very first act of business is to seam up the sides, bringing them in a little bit, and once that's happened, I'm just going in with my good scissors and cutting off each sleeve. And I'm not reinforcing these sleeves yet because this is 100% wool. It's a non-superwash wool, so it clings enough to keep the stitches safe. At this point, I've secured one side of the sweater, so I haven't sewn the edge where I want it to be for the end product, the final product, but I've just seamed in a little bit to reinforce the edge of the sweater because I'm taking it apart, I'm manipulating it, I'm starting to cut it up, and I want to make sure that I don't lose the edge. I don't want to lose any of those stitches. So I'm going to snip off my second sleeve, and I'll leave some of these scissor sounds in for those of you that like the scissors. Now we're rolling again, this time actually seaming together the sides of the sweater. So again, I didn't measure exactly here. I was really eyeballing the halfway point between the far edge of the sweater and where the cables start. And then after doing this on the first side, I do count in the number of columns to make sure it lines up pretty closely for the second side. So I'll say that using my walking foot on this machine has been pretty easy in handling knit fabrics, hand knit fabrics, and I've used it mostly for steeking purposes, but in this case, it's fun to experiment using the sewing machine for reconstructing or resizing a finished knit sweater. So here's where some of my confusion starts. I have the sleeve and it's time to figure out how to reattach the sleeve, which obviously needs to be done in a circular way, but having not done this before, it doesn't quite make sense to my brain. So there's a lot of puzzlement, a lot of taking my time and just looking at things to try to figure out what makes sense. I think the biggest hurdle was just understanding which sides of the sweater need to be touching and which sides are facing where the sleeve needs to go so I can get it back on the machine and sew it. So there was a process of turning it right side out, lining it up, turning it inside out, lining it up before I realized, okay, it actually needs to go inside the sweater so I can sew the edge of it and then pull the sleeve out and have it be finished when I turn the garment right side out. And we'll get to that, you'll see it. Again, several of you watching will know exactly what you should do or what I should do here. And I wish you were here to help me in person. But watching videos, pausing as I go, and trying to figure out how this works before going a step too far and maybe ruining the pieces of fabric I have, it works out, but it's a learning process. So here's one finished edge. I think it looks pretty good so far. And then what I was just mentioning about the sleeve, figuring out which side of the sleeve needs to eventually be on the outside, the right side of the garment, and then understanding, for my brain, jumping through the hoop of how do I actually assemble this? And you see my puzzlement. So here's where I realize, okay, it has to go inside the sweater so I can line up those edges and then get it on the machine to seam this all the way around. And once I've got it all set, I need to remove this portion of my sewing machine so that I can get the sleeve sort of in the round, as I would say as a knitter, around, I don't know, in the throat of the machine. I don't know my terminology. So I've got it set up here, and now I'm actually ready to seam this. And once I got to this point and understood sort of the anatomy of the sweater and how it was supposed to work and how to start sewing this together, then things made a lot of sense and were pretty easy to do, which gives me confidence that I could do this on other projects. If I have other sweaters that I'm not wearing, that I just don't enjoy wearing, or they don't turn out the way I imagined for myself, then I could use them as gifts for other people in my life that might enjoy them and might be a more flattering or better suited fit for whatever the garment is. And that makes me feel really good. I don't like having things sit around and collect dust, be neglected. I think if you spend all this time and all this money on fiber you love, a pattern you're excited about, and then all of the time that goes into actually making it, executing it, and finishing it, that detail work, it's a real shame if you're not able to enjoy it in the end. So this makes me excited that doing this as a test run might put me in a position where I can do this to other projects down the road, and it won't be as confusing. It won't be as risky because I'll be confident about what I'm doing. So now that story is past us, you'll see a little bit of the sweater here. I think the sleeve looks pretty good, so I'm good to go back in and trim off the excess. My contingency plan was that if I had attached a sleeve and it was completely wrong, it was the wrong length, or I did it upside down or inside out, then I could go in with a seam ripper and rip these seams out and try again. I don't want to have to do that too many times, but it is there as a plan B. So after I checked that this looked normal and sort of behaved as I expected, I can turn things inside out and trim off the excess. And I'm leaving about a 1/4 inch past the seam. And I should say, for all of my seams here, I'm using a triple stitch. I watched a nice video with helpful information about what kind of stitches work well for the elasticity of knitted fabric. And a triple stitch is one that works well, at least for the drape of the garments that I've made. So now I'm going to repeat all of this on the other side of the sweater. You'll see here I'm counting my columns of stitches to make sure I know approximately where to put that side seam, and you'll see the final results in just a few minutes. In case you're endeavoring to do this along with me at home or apply this process to a sweater or something you've made that you're no longer interested in having, I'll walk through the general steps I took to reconstruct this garment. The first thing was to figure out how much smaller I needed it to be. And for that, I had the recipient try it on, and then later I had Ned try it on as a stand-in. So that's step one. Find out the measurements or try whatever you're passing on onto the new person, and then make the notes of how much you want to adjust your current garment. And for me, this process works well because every sweater I make myself is going to be sort of a 2x, sometimes a 3x in pattern sizing. I have about a 50 to 52 inch chest circumference at the largest point. So the sweaters I'm making have a circumference of at least 54, 55 inches, sometimes more like 60 inches if there's quite a bit of ease. So a lot of the people in my life are smaller than me. Ned is quite a bit smaller than me. I have several friends that wouldn't wear the same size as me, but I've created something with plenty of fabric. So that's one boon, I guess, for me working up these garments in a larger size. If I ever tire of them and I want to pass them on or repurpose them, I do have quite a bit of fabric to work with. And for resizing it for another person, like I mentioned, we try it on them, we get the measurements and figure out exactly how much we want to shave off. In this case, I wanted to take off about 16 inches total in circumference. So I was looking at that with the sweater flat and coming in from the edge about 4 inches. So that's 4 inches from the front, 4 inches from the back, 8 inches on one side, and then on the other side, another 8 inches. So that's my 16 inches of circumference that I'm deleting from this sweater. Then I turned the sweater inside out, took my measurements, or in my case, eyeballed my measurements, and put some pins in place just to guide me. And then it was time to reinforce the fabric on the sewing machine. After that, I was free to start snipping it up without too much worry. Again, knowing that if something went terribly wrong, I could always rip out the seams and give it another try. So step one was to bring the sides in. Step two was to remove those sleeves and then figure out how much sleeve I wanted to delete before lining it back up with the edge of the body. And for that, I needed the sleeve to go inside the sweater, sort of tucked inside, so I had right sides facing, and I could run that all the way around the armhole opening on my sewing machine. Fortunately, in this case, I didn't have to adjust anything at the neck opening, and I also didn't have to adjust the length. If I had had to do that, it might be a little bit more involved of a process where I would want to pick up stitches and perhaps re-knit a neckline or re-knit the ribbing, or at least graft together part of the body so that there's a seamless transition from the body pattern and then the ribbing. So in a future project, I might need to make those adjustments, but for this one, it was pretty simple to do. After I had sewed all of the pieces back together, I would flip things right side out to double check that they looked okay, and then I could turn them inside out and trim off that excess fabric, leaving about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And there we have it. This is the wrong side of the sweater, but I'm just going through to double check that all of my threads, all of my excess fabric is trimmed off so that this can be as easy wearing as possible for Rihanna. And now let's take a look at it right side out, and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, I did it, kind of. I mean, the sweater didn't come apart. I think I secured all of the raw edges, and the sweater is definitely a good deal smaller than it was when we started. So a couple pros and cons. Pro, this was pretty quick. I've spent maybe an hour sitting down and chopping this up, seaming it back together, and now it's a garment that can go to someone else and have a good life instead of sitting on my bookcase, never being worn. The cons, well, some of the seams aren't super straight. I think if I knew what I was doing, or if I took a little bit more time to sit down with someone and get coached through the process, I think it would be a slightly or much more professional result. But I don't think it's bad. So let's take a look at the right side. All right, here we are. Just looking at it, I wouldn't know that anything is up. We've got the seams here that join the sleeves. It's not, I don't know. It looks fine from this side because we have reverse stockinette at these borders. And then looking at the side seams themselves, it's not like the most straight thing in the world, but this is wool. So when this gets blocked, when this gets worn, it shifts and it has quite a bit of memory. So I'm not worried about that. If we look along the side, it honestly doesn't look bad. There's a seam, just like if you were to seam this together in pieces. And yes, the seam doesn't trace an exact column of stitches because I didn't take the time to flip back and forth, pin, and then slowly sew it up. I just sort of estimated. I did count in the number of stitches so that it would be an equal amount of fabric taken from each side. But after that, I just took it to the machine and started sewing. So I think this is pretty decent for a quick sweater repurpose. And then the seam on the other side. I think this one looks better. And then we just have a seam all the way around the sleeve. It seams on the back. There's a seam at the underarm. And then around the front. This one has a little bit of puckering. But again, when you're wearing it and when you block it, I think that kind of stuff will be easily disguised, easily hidden. I'll have Ned try this on again so that you can get an idea of the difference in the fit, and we'll do a before and after just to see if this was worth the time. We get a little bit of side by side with Ned, the before and the after. You can see how much fabric we took away. I mean, this is a pretty big transformation. It goes from almost unwearable to something that appears fitted and like it maybe was made for Ned. Again, Ned is just standing in, so now we'll go to a clip of Rihanna, and Rihanna wanted it to be an oversized sweater, but initially it was just swallowing her. And I think now this is a pretty good result. I think it looks comfortable. but still like it was meant for her. Well, personally, I'm thrilled with this. I really hate the idea of spending time, spending money, putting a lot of effort into something and then not being happy with it. I'm not a big personal believer in pulling an entire project out if I don't have to. I really don't want to pull a complete sweater apart and reuse the yarn. I would rather find a purpose for that fabric that I made and see it live a happy life. In this case, because the sweater was much bigger than it needed to be for Rihanna, I was able to just bring it in, do a little bit of tailoring, haphazard tailoring, but I'm super pleased. I think that this is now a great sweater that can go on to a friend who will enjoy wearing it and it'll have a good life, instead of staying with me and being something that I have issues with from the making process, whatever those issues are. So I have a couple of other projects that I'm not happy with. I even have some sweaters that I've made that are really beautiful, that fit me well, but I just don't like the structure. I don't like the fit. And so one of those I think I might try to turn into a cardigan. So I'll do the same kind of thing. I'll do some sort of reinforcement up the front, figure out whether or not I can put some sort of button band or zipper or simple closure on it. And it might lead me to using those garments more and giving them a better life. I think whatever you're making, whether it's toys, stuffed animals, blankets, hats, garments, sweaters, I think it's most important that all of those things have a life. So if it's a gift, hopefully the people you're giving these things to will use them and enjoy them. If it's for you, hopefully you're taking the time to wear them. Wear the things you've made, even if it means eventually they start to pill, maybe they get stained, maybe something happens to them, but you've enjoyed them. So that's the big takeaway here, and the reason I wanted to sit down and try to adapt this project that I wasn't wearing. Obviously, this was no sort of tutorial because I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm always happy to hear your advice in the comments or your stories in the comments. If there are projects that you've adapted and given new life to, I'd love to hear about it. As always, thanks for choosing to spend a little bit of time with me, and hopefully I'll see you again for a future video. Make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already, and you can find me on Instagram, Ravelry, at MakerMarkKnits, and I'd love to connect with you there. Happy knitting, happy crocheting, happy crafting to you, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye.